Hello, good morning everyone in Indonesia and Australia. Welcome to AR by Channel Jakarta. Thank you for joining with us for this morning discussion. So this morning we will talk about the current development status of Papua, digital infrastructure, health, and natural resources. But this is not the first time for us in ARB Channel Jakarta to talk about Papua. Before, we held already some discussions about the culture, history, and tourism issue in around Papua regions. But this morning it must be different that we will hear different perspective from our colleague and our friends not only in Indonesia but also in Australia. So we will be happy for your questions, for your response from our keynote speaker later. Okay? So we already have now in here Ambassador Freddy Numberi from Indonesia, Dr. Richard Chaffel from University of Melbourne, Dr. Jenny Mundro from University of Queensland, and Professor Dr. Geoffrey Hope, Emeritus Professor of the Australian National University. This morning discussions moderator will be lead. Our moderator today is Dr. Gabriel Lele from Political Science, Gadjah Mada University, Yogyakarta. Bang Gabriel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Today's discussion will be on the topic is on the current development status of Papua. We will be looking specifically at the development of digital infrastructure and natural resources. And for today's discussion, we already have three distinguished speakers from Australia and one speaker from Indonesia. And let me just briefly introduce our speakers for today. The first one is Professor Geoffrey Hope. So, Professor Geoffrey Hope, a very good afternoon in Canberra, and welcome to this forum as well. And again, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
He has actually, an extensive experience in Indonesia. He's an ecologist who studies pollen and charcoal records from forming webs to help to understand human and climatic influence on system to long-term scales. He has studied high mountain response to climate change and human settlement in New Guinea since 1969, so very long time ago. And that also included stays in Papua Mountains, in Wamena, in Mount Jaya and Trikora. He also has looked at human impact over time in different highlands near Wamena. Wamena is one of the area in the island Papua. And of course, in some of the lowland studies in Aru Islands and North Nabire, Nabire dan Kepulauan Aru, he contributed to a very substantial section on paleo ecology. So please, Professor Hope, correct me my pronunciation because this is something very new for me. And in 2000, he wrote a book on the ecology of Papua, and he has an interest in peatlands across the island. He also has surveyed large lowland peatlands in Kalimantan Timur, also so quite extensive experience. And he is interested in differences between these and large peatland in New Guinea. He last visited Papua in 2004, but is still
mampir ke apotek
2004, and currently he's still working on core materials there. Professor Hope has authored no more than 200 publications, books, and articles, and among those publications, some of those or many of those deal with Papua, including the environmental change in the Balian Valley, Lembah Balian, along vegetation history from lowland Irian Jaya or Papua, Indonesia. Also a book on biomass burning in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, natural and human-induced fire events in fossil record, and environmental change in the Aru Island, and also the last one is the soils of Papua, as I've mentioned before. So Professor Hope today will be sharing his experience, some of his thoughts on the balance of natural resources development and conservation in Papua. The second speaker is Professor Richard Chauva.
Pak Gibi, we cannot hear you, Pak Gibi.
I think you've muted yourself, Gabriel.
Yeah. Pak Gibi is mute at the moment. Right.
I'm not, something is just wrong going on. So again, the second speaker is Professor Richard Chauva. He's currently a principal honorary fellow at the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne. Professor Richard has his PhD from the University of Sydney and a Master of Art at the School of Oriental and African Studies, London. As we know him, his research has focused on political and social change in Eastern Indonesia. Of course, Papua is one of those, and then also in Maluku. Some of his notable publications include Indonesia Ending Repression in Irian Jaya. The other one would be the Land of Papua and the Indonesian State, together with two policy papers from the East-West Center Washington, titled The Papua Conflict, Jakarta's Perception and Policies, and the other one is Constructing Papuan Nationalism, History, Ethnicity, and Adaptation. The most recent chapters and articles include Papua as a multicultural issue for Indonesia and Australia, and Papua under the Jokowi presidency, which is very current as well. So also currently, Richard has been traveling all around Indonesia and gives some lectures in Universitas Indonesia, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Universitas Brawijaya, and also Universitas Cendrawasih. And given his extensive experience in social and political change, so Pak Richard, we expect Pak Richard would share some of the thoughts on the social and political change, and also a little bit of conflict in Universitas Indonesia, and then we have Pak Freddy Numberi. Pak Freddy, thank you very much for being with us. We know that you've been very busy currently, and even you cancel your health appointment this morning to be with us. As we know that Pak Freddy is the retired admiral in Indonesian Navy, and also, well, we know him more as a politician. He was part of the second United Indonesian cabinet and served as the Minister of Transportation between October 22, 2009 to October 2011. And also under the presidency of Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, Pak Freddy was chosen as the ambassador of Indonesia to Italy, to Albania, and Malta. And then again was born as the Minister of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries from 2004 to 2009. But of course, apart from that, Freddy was the governor of Papua from 1998 to 2000. So Pa Freddy is today with us to share again his experience, sitting in many positions, but he preferred to share with us on the let me check. Okay, Papua in general in the eyes of international community, and then the other issues which is depend on how we can use his experience. And last but not least, we have let me call Ibu Jenny. Ibu Jenny Munro. I was surprised myself because apparently Bu Jenny can speak Bahasa. Bu Jenny has also conducted an extensive research in Papua, and he is known as the political anthropologist, which specialize in the issue of health. He has been conducting many research on health issues, looking at the from the perspective of indigenous people, even also as I can see in her publication, the role of the customary institution. So Professor Jenny will be sharing with us on the issues of health, which is also another important issues in Papua. So that would be pretty much our speakers today, because beyond that, all of the participants are speakers, are resource person. So we also have Ambassador Imron Kotan, which happened to join with us today, and we also have some of the leading figure from many ministries in Indonesia, and also another important resource for today is Miss Sarah Hewitt, as introduced by Jenny before. So thank you everyone, basically for being here today with us. And then to start with, I would like to invite Professor Richard Chauvel. Richard, you are the the first speakers, and you have around 25 minutes, Pak, to share your experience, and then the time is all yours. Please, Pak Richard.
Now, can you hear me okay? And would you like
Yes.
me to share my presentation, or can you put it up?
You may do it as well, Pak Richard.
Yeah, okay.
You can just...
I think you have to enable me to do it.
Okay. Mbak Evi, can someone help Pak Richard to do that? Okay, Pak Richard, done. I've enabled you to share the presentation.
Okay. Good. I hope that is that is visible. So I'd like to start off by thanking Pak Teddy Montoro and Yayasan Mandala Wangi for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. I think it's a great privilege for me as an international observer of Indonesia and perhaps particularly Papua to participate in such a discussion. And you can all appreciate that over the last several months that it has been a matter of observing Indonesia and Papua from a considerable distance during the pandemic. You know, the last time I was in Indonesia was at Pak Gabriel's University in Yogyakarta,
Yes.
which I enjoyed very much. What I'd like to do today is to, and it's a great honor to be speaking on the same panel as Pa Freddy Numberi, and I'm sure Pa Freddy, along with my Australian colleagues, will bring us many insights on the current issues and recent developments in Papua. So I'd like to split my comments into three brief sessions. The first being, seemed to me that we are now in a position to reflect back on 2 decades of important developments in Papua. And I think that the important developments that have really taken place since the fall of the New Order government and the resignation of President Suharto in May 1998. And I think that that period of time in the years immediately after Suharto's resignation brought about, or we witnessed the revival and transformation of the independence movement. You'll remember the meeting of 100 Papuan leaders with President Habibie in February 1999, when the Papuan leaders demanded that their independence be recognized. That was followed the following year with the Congress Papua, Papuan People's Congress of mid-2000, and then the important special autonomy law was eventually signed into law in 2001. And I think the current debate in Papua and amongst policymakers in Jakarta about the extension of the financial provisions of the special autonomy law have morphed into a much more general discussion of Indonesian governance in Papua. And I think it allows us to reflect back on the last 2 decades and see how and think about how Papua has changed within a national context, which Indonesia has experienced and still is going through a process of democratic transition. It has successfully held 5 national elections and hundreds of local elections. At the same time, Indonesia has become a member of the G20. So we're talking about a period of very, very considerable change, both within Indonesia as a whole and particularly in Papua. So if I'd like to just dwell very briefly on the special autonomy law, use the Indonesian singkatan of OTSIS, it's a bit easier. OTSIS has become the broad framework for Indonesian policy in Papua for the period since 2001, supplemented by policies and programs and institutions promoting accelerated economic development in Papua, particularly under the President Yudhoyono. And when we think about contemporary developments in Papua, I think it's important to reflect back on how the special autonomy law came to be formulated, and I think it's most important, in the context of the current debate, to remember that the law that was passed in 2001 was a function of negotiations between a special committee of the National Parliament and a special team appointed by the then governor of the province of Papua. So it was a negotiation and the formulation of a law in which Papuans played an important part in. And the outcome of those negotiations was a law that provided somewhat wider autonomy, more generous allocation of revenue to the provincial government than what was the case with the general nationwide regional autonomy laws of 1999. I think it's important to reflect that the special autonomy law reflected many of the values that were discussed during that so-called Papuan Spring of a couple of years after President Suharto's resignation, as they were articulated at the 2000 Congress Congress Papua. And the law recognized the interest and identities of indigenous Papua, orang asli Papua sebagai bagian dari Melanesia, its cultural symbols, and the MRP, the Papuan People's Assembly, was established as a representative of Papuans. It was planned and still not implemented. A Commission of Truth and Reconciliation was established. In some respects, as many observers have argued, that the special autonomy law was, in a sense, the Indonesian government's response to Papuan demands for independence, delivered directly to President Habibie in beginning of 1999, and articulated with the Congress Papua. Many of the law's supporters in Jakarta that hope with the implementation of the special autonomy law that the Papuan support for independence would moderate. And I think looking back 20 years later, I think one of the questions that we need to address of whether that hope of policymakers and political leaders in Jakarta, that support for independence would become more moderate, has this indeed happened? And I think it's worth keeping in mind that as we observe and try to analyze the current debate about the future of the special autonomy law now taking place in Papua and elsewhere, is that the special autonomy law has always been a matter of considerable contention. It was at the time it was introduced and has been ever since. And I think to remind us of that, I'm borrowing a slide from my old friend Simon Morin, the former member of the DPR and a distinguished Papuan. Morin gave a seminar in Sydney in I think it was in 2002, 2003, in which he reflected the aspirations of many Papuan leaders, particularly senior government leaders at the time, including the then Governor Salosa, his successor Basuebu, who saw the special autonomy law as a means of conflict resolution. And you can see in this diagram how Morin is depicting an existing conflict, and he thought with the effective implementation of the special autonomy law that eventually Papua would become, if the law is implemented successfully, Papuan people will get a stronger position as part of the Indonesian nation, and thereby strengthening national integrity. And I think that one of the issues that I think we can reflect on is to what extent Morin's hopes for the successful implementation of special autonomy have indeed been realized. And I'd comment that it doesn't seem to me that there is so much elite Papuan support for the continuation of special autonomy as there was at the beginning of this process. And one of I think the things that we can look at is why if I'm right in thinking that this is indeed the case, why has this in fact happened? And this is to illustrate to a couple of very simple diagrams, in a sense, a very crude representation of some of the aspects of the debate about the special autonomy law currently going on. On the left-hand side, we have the graph of the relatively generous budget allocations to Papua over the period of the special autonomy law. So that this is, I think, particularly from the perspective of the central government, that it has been very supportive of Papuan economic development and so on, with that relatively generous allocation of budget. On the other side of the slide is really depicting something of that section of Papuan political opinion, which is wanting to reject the continuation of the special autonomy law, and the so-called second volume, Jilid Kedua. It also makes reference to the way that the issues and values of the Papuan Lives Matter has also impacted on the debate in Papua. And as I noted before, what we're talking about in the narrow technical sense is that next year the generous financial provisions of the special autonomy law will come to an end. But I think what we can observe in Papua in particular is that the debate about the financial provisions has become a much more broadly focused debate, and a discussion about how the law has been implemented, whether it has failed or not, should it be rejected, revised, or continued, or should there be a referendum. And I think it's important to think about the debate in the way it has been framed and influenced by the key developments, really probably dating from the end of 2018, with the killing of construction workers in Nduga. The racist cases in the Papuan hostels in Surabaya and Malang, followed by the widespread demonstrations, anti-racism protests throughout Papua in August and September of last year, and how within that context the Papuan Lives Matter has gained traction. And now I'd like to move on briefly to the second bit of my talk, and look at some of the underlying development issues and demographic, economic, structural issues of which government policies, and particularly the special autonomy law and the policies of accelerating Papuan development, these very crude, broad metrics, which I'm going to talk about for a couple of minutes, provide that broader context. And I think, as the title of my talk suggested, I think what we're looking at in Papua is a paradox of resource wealth and subsistence poverty. What I'm going to be arguing, that we're looking at, in a sense, two dimensions of inequality, and the differences in welfare and economic development between the two Papuan provinces on one side and the rest of Indonesia on the other. But there are important inequalities within Papua itself, and I think that these feed into the challenges of how governments in Papua and in Jakarta formulate effective economic development policies. So to capture them, something of that paradox, West Papua and Papua, as measured by gross regional product per capita, are amongst the wealthiest provinces of fifth and sixth wealthiest provinces in Indonesia. If we look at the Human Development Index, the two Papuan provinces sit at the bottom of the table. And it's this contrast which goes both to the heart of the development challenges that governments face, and also, I would argue, significantly influence the nature of the political conflicts which continue in Papua. So the inequalities within Papua itself can have I would argue, a distinct ethnic dimension. So it's the differences in economic development, welfare, as measured by human development indexes, between a predominantly Papuan impoverished, mainly in the highland and remote areas, in comparison with the relatively wealthy non-Papuan urban areas and the areas around the Freeport mine. I think that underlying, or the general background to these settlement economic inequality factors which I'm talking about, is that I think we all have to keep in mind the fundamental demographic transformation that has occurred in Papua since the early 1960s. In other words, since Papua again became part of Indonesia. According to the last Dutch census, something like 2.5% of the population under Netherlands administration was people of Indonesian background from outside Papua. According to the 2010 census, this figure had increased greatly to about 36, I think, percent of the population. So by any terms, by any global comparisons, that is a massive demographic transformation. If we look at cities like Jayapura and Sorong, the portion of the non-Papuan portion of the population is now well over 60%. So if you try and think about these in distinct settlement patterns, then I suppose what I've labelled here is the ethnic demography of Papua. That in Papua province, over 80% of the non-Papuan population are concentrated in Jayapura, Merauke, Meribe, Kerom, and around the Freeport mine. Whereas Papuans make up the majority of over 90% of the 4 districts of the central highlands in Papua. And you find a very comparable settlement demographic pattern in the province of West Papua as well. And when you overlay these two different, what I argue, predominantly ethnic settlement settlement patterns in Papua and then overlay that with the Human Development Index figures, you see that Jayapura and Sorong have HDI figures which are by no means out of place with many other urban areas in the archipelago. Whereas in the predominantly Papuan highland, the HDI figures are well below, significantly below the national figure, and it's perhaps notable that the district of Ninduga, where we saw that there's killings of construction workers at the end of 2018, has the lowest of not even 30. So I think that these what we're looking at, I think, is really an economic structure which in a sense resonates with Furnival's depiction of colonial society in the 1920s and 30s, a society of comprising of two or more elements or social orders living side by side, but not mingling. So that this is the we're looking at an economy where urban economies are dominated by the non-Papuan immigrants from elsewhere in Indonesia, and to a degree, the Papuans are isolated within that. On the left-hand side is in Hamadi, just outside central Jayapura, one of many Papuan artifacts run by non-Papuans. And likewise, you get this contrast in an old photo in the central part of Jayapura of the first KFC and supermarket, in contrast to Papuan women selling small quantities of vegetables and fruit in the evening. So it gets that back to that idea of Furnival's plural society. And what I would argue, and I'll just briefly touch on, that this demographic transformation, if we read the political literature put out by many Papuans, it has been, certainly as I have argued and colleagues from LIPI have argued, that demographic transformation is one of the factors fueling Papuan nationalism. And on the other side of the coin, just very, very briefly, is the very significant wealth of Freeport. So the other side of the coin of Papuan poverty and marginalisation is the Freeport mine, and as we all know, one of the largest gold and copper mines in the world, and constituting a very significant part of the province of Papua's GDP and also of Indonesia. I think where the politics of this work is how Freeport has become to symbolise for Papuan political activists and nationalists, that the mine has come to symbolise the exploitation of Papuan resources for the benefits of others and not Papuans. I think it's worth noting that the human rights movement in Papua really started around alleged abuses that occurred around the Freeport mine, and the first notable report on human rights abuses was about Freeport and the surrounding area, published in 1995. I would just like to finish my presentation with a very brief comment, because I know this is an area that Pat Gabriel has some interest in. But I think much of what motivated me to finish on the very significant changes in the administrative structures in Papua is that, nearly quite separate from the tendency in the debate, at least in Papuan circles, about the success or otherwise of the special autonomy law, is for us to remember that success or otherwise, there have been enormous changes in the politics, society, and administration of Papua. Not occurring independently of the special autonomy law, but certainly under the umbrella, but changes that have brought about really significant changes, and I would argue with implications for the capacity of government to provide services and promote economic development. And I think the process of Pemekaran, of the creation of new provinces and new district governments, is a national phenomenon. I think the number of Kabupaten Kota has more or less doubled since the beginning of the Reformasi, the Reformasi period. In the case of Papua, there's been an increase of some fourfold. So what was originally 12 districts in the region now covering the two provinces has grown to almost 40. And we've seen in beginning of 2003 the division of Papua into two provinces of Papua and Papua Barat. And the sorts of changes that this has facilitated, I think we've seen the dispersal and nearly the emergence of local political elites and their incorporation within the national government administrative system. I think there's been a process of both the state co-opting local elites and local elites also co-opting and changing the state, particularly at those local levels of government. The questions that I want to leave you with is, have these many new district governments brought about the provision of better health and education services or not? Have there been have these new local governments been more effective in implementing government development programs? As we know, both under President Yudhoyono and President Jokowi, the objective is accelerating economic development in the Papuan provinces. Has this new fragmented structure of administration facilitated that process or not? So what I'm suggesting is that we need I think a more thorough evaluation of those very significant changes in the structure of administration, and not least because there is currently a proposal for a further division of the creation of 2 or 3 more provinces in Papua. I think the same questions need to be asked of that process, and I think with the Pemekaran process, with the creation of all those new district governments, there, to the best of my knowledge, was never any grand design. What we're talking about is a largely ad hoc process of creation of these new administrative areas, rather than as a result of Bapanas or other or Dalam Negeri saying, this is the appropriate structure for the administrative structures in Papua. So I think just to very quickly finish up, I think what we can reflect on over the last 20 years is that many of the issues of conflict within Papua and between the Papuan provinces and the and the national government continue and are still with us. I think we need to reflect on to the extent that the special autonomy law and the development pembangunan processes which has gone with it, together with the role of the security forces in Papua, whether any of those strategies have been effective in moderating Papuan support for independence. So thank you very much for your patience and attention.
Thank you very much, Pak Richard. We can get some very important point from Pak Richard's presentation, looking at the process of special autonomy, which is still going on up to now, a very issue. Pak Richard also emphasized one of the very important point on the paradox of resource wealth, where the issue of inequality, not only in geographical terms but also in demographic terms, has been a very daunting challenge in managing Papua development. Also the issue of pemekaran, and that really reflects Pak Richard's extensive research on Papua. And then we can come back to Pak Richard later on in a question or answer and answer session. So let's move now to the second speaker, and I would like to invite Dr. Jenny Munro first, speaking about the issue of health in Papua. So Professor Jenny, the time is yours for around 25 minutes.
All right, thank you. I'm still looking at Richard's screen. I was just wondering if it will distract me, Richard. I will end up talking about something else entirely. That's all right. I can just maybe change the view.
Sure.
That's all right. All right. So thank you, everyone. First, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which I am meeting you from, Yagra and Turrbal peoples here in Brisbane in Australia. Pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge all of the indigenous peoples around Indonesia, especially in Tanah Papua. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Eddie and Dr. Gabrielle for inviting me, and also hello to my fellow panelists today. I sort of heard about this webinar a week or so ago, and I have not really had time to put together a PowerPoint, but I thought that what I would do is just talk a little bit about my work, maybe pick up on some of the things that Richard has already raised for us, and look forward to some questions later on. So my work will focus on health, or my discussion today will focus on health. I think we can say that health has been increasingly of attention for Papuans, that there is increasing discussion of kind of multiple overlapping health crises that threaten the existence of Papuans. So some of these discussions are not new. For example, HIV at epidemic levels, this is something that Papuans have been talking about for quite some time now, probably 15 years or so, which I will touch on a little bit more in a second. But also HIV, co-infectious with tuberculosis often. And we have kind of the chronic diseases that are on the rise, so non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension in Papua. And also there's I guess you could say, an epidemic of violence that affects people, different kinds of violence affecting people in different kinds of ways. These are some of the different health crises that Papuans have been drawing attention to of late, to the point that the Papua Health Department director, I guess, Pa Giai, has written a book about how he sees his work as in the health department as kind of preventing the extinction of Papuans and preventing the extinction of Papuans. So this is obviously become multiple, dimensions of a health crisis in Papua at the moment. And it would be interesting to think about whether those crises have increased or decreased over the past 20 years of special autonomy. I wanted to just say a little bit about myself first and where I'm coming from with this topic. I did my PhD in anthropology at the Australian National University. I graduated from there in 2010. And I focus my PhD research on the experiences of young Papuans going to university in North Sulawesi. So I had a LIPI permit at that time to travel to Manado, and I lived, as an anthropologist tends to do, I lived in the community with Papuan students, particularly those from the Central Highlands areas, for over a year in North Sulawesi. I went there to try to understand what it was like for young Papuans, the first generation to be educated in the Indonesian system, to go and experience other parts of Indonesia. So they had all left, the ones I got to know best had left their highlands homes and villages, sometimes for the first time ever, leaving a place like Wamena in the highlands, and traveled usually by boat 4 days over to Bitung for the stop for Manado. And some, many lived there obviously for several years during their university studies. And then almost all of them returned back to Papua, many back to Wamena, otherwise to Jayapura. So I was interested in the dreams that they had for their schooling, having grown up in the Indonesian system, which strongly emphasizes the kind of possibilities of education and the transformative potential. And I wondered what the reality was like for them as they studied at university, and also what their relationships were like with the local communities that surrounded them in North Sulawesi. So Manadonese people, Minahasan people in those areas. They were bonded together in many ways by Christianity, as Manado is a predominantly Christian city, and the Papuans that I got to know were predominantly Christian as well. But I was interested in those experiences, and I discovered along the way many dimensions of what it was like for them to be a young person, to be a student. This might include relationships with each other, perhaps even pregnancies and having children. It included their struggles to earn money and to also kind of subsist in those places where they were far from home. But the kind of bigger finding that I took from that earlier work was the extent to which the ethnic tensions, the kind of ethno-racial formations between local people and Papuans were very strong. And the racism that Papuans experienced in those contexts prevented them in many ways from having an experience of feeling belonging and new relationships and connections in North Sulawesi. I suspect that some of these dynamics, as we've seen in the news over the years and increasingly last year, are common throughout Indonesia for Papuan young people who are living outside of Papua and also in Papua. So in this context, I was interested in how it was that these, many of which are historical racial ideas that date to the Dutch period and before, how are they still kind of making their way into people's everyday lives, going to school, whether that's healthcare, going to a clinic, and so forth. So that work led me to want to know more about those everyday kinds of racism. At the same time, I became increasingly aware through my work with young adults that HIV was becoming a huge problem in Papua. And so I began to want to kind of understand more about the HIV epidemic that was unfolding there, especially as young people were obviously victims of this epidemic quite early on. And you can imagine what it was like for their families who had, put all of their hopes and dreams into young adults who they had, sent to study abroad in places like Manado or Jogja, often, especially in the highlands context, using, growing vegetables, growing gardens for sale and raising pigs for sale so that they could also support their young people while they were abroad. only to have them perhaps succumb to this HIV that began to circulate quite strongly, especially in the kind of mid to late 2000s. So I got more interested in health, but I was still hanging on to these questions about belonging, about Papuan experiences as part of Indonesia, and about everyday life, and also different kinds of violence. So we often hear about overt, dramatic physical violence in Papua and human rights abuses, but I also wanted to know about those less obvious kinds of violence that make people feel small, that make people feel embarrassed, or that make Papuans feel perhaps ashamed. What I found was that there's actually always a mix of kind of some aspects that might be shameful, like there is some stigma, but there's also a lot of pride, and especially around cultural heritage and cultural traditions in Papua. This is something that I found again in work on HIV specifically. I just wanted to also explain, because there's so many questions about how it is that a foreigner can do research in Papua, that the bulk of my HIV work has been done when I was working with different NGOs in Papua as an advisor and as a collaborator on their programming for HIV. And I was invited to do so by NGOs in Papua. And the advice that I received at the time from the Indonesian embassy in Canada was that I should be using a socio-cultural visa, and that this kind of work did not require a research permit. So I just wanted to make sure that that's really clear. Let me just turn now to talk a little bit about the HIV work. So I'm drawing here on a paper that I've recently published in the Journal of the Royal Anthropological Institute. If you don't have access to that, you can email me and I will send you a copy, or I think from my academia page, I have preprint uploaded up there for the full paper. I want to start this by talking about a man called Yoram Yogobi. So Yoram was a Dani man or a Bali man from Wamena. I met him first at a 2009 HIV conference in Bali. So there was a big international HIV conference. And since Papua was recognized as having quite a high rate of HIV, the government went out of its way to send a lot of participants from Papua to the international conference being held in Bali. And Yoram was one of those people. So we met several times and talked about the situation of HIV. And one of the things that was already immediately apparent to me at the conference was that even though it has become clear that Indigenous Papuans are the ones who are most affected by HIV, the prevalence rates are much higher. There were maybe two presentations at the international conference out of 500 presentations that were actually by Indigenous Papuans. And I thought this was, considering the situation in Papua, I wondered then, how is this possible that Papuans are going to lead the way and manage this health crisis in Papua if, even in this kind of international context, they barely have opportunities to speak and to discuss their experiences and what they need to get the information they might need to work on HIV problems back in Papua. So Yoram talked to me a lot more in later years about the real prevalence that he felt HIV was at within Papua. So he didn't know necessarily the statistics, because we didn't have disaggregated statistics until probably 2013. But he talked about empty huts around Wamena. So, the honai, the round huts, sort of iconic for the Papuan highlands. And he talked about the fact that there were empty huts. There were simply too many funerals going on. There were just, it was clear to him and others that HIV was taking a toll far greater than what the statistical evidence was showing. So he talked about the need to save his people. And this also resonates, of course, with what Gia has been saying about saving Papuans. He emphasized the need to get the real data about HIV. And I bring this up partly because one of the issues, as we saw, as Pat Richard pointed out, is that the data about conditions in Papua is often not disaggregated by ethnicity. So the indigenous status of Papuans is often not captured. So we often don't actually know. We can only estimate based on the fact that more Papuans live in rural areas and rural areas have, say, lower rates of literacy. So we're only guessing. However, the census has collected ethnic background data since 2010. So it's possible to actually get a much clearer picture about what exactly the different literacy or disease prevalence or income prevalence, income amounts are across Papua, and to see just how disadvantaged Indigenous Papuans are, what other kinds of disadvantage are going on. Are men or women more disadvantaged, and so forth. And also to break down even we often talk about the non-Papuan migrants in Papua as though they're, generally doing well, economically prosperous. But I think there's also poverty there as well, right? There's also poverty in migrant populations in Papua. So breaking down some of this data would be really useful. But at the same time, that's just statistical data. So as an anthropologist, I also want to know about people's lived experiences. And I want to know more qualitatively. I want to understand how it is that, the education system is, not producing young people who are literate, or how it is that healthcare is not improving people's health. I want to also understand, what does health actually mean to people? And to see health as more than just health services, but to see health as, affected by livelihoods, by environment, by culture, by politics, by violence. And so these are some of the ways that I conceptualize health. And this has come about through talking to Papuans about the HIV problem. So a couple of the things I want to draw attention to that Yoram and his NGO and other NGOs have been doing in Papua that I think are really positive and interesting, are that they are, so first of all, they don't chase targets, as we would say. They don't, they try not to operate just according to an external kind of procedure of, reporting of kind of efficiency metrics, where for every HIV activity, for example, they need to try to distribute 100 condoms or, take 50 people to testing. They try to avoid these kind of restrictive targets and instead focus on the sociocultural kind of assets and capabilities that are there. So, for example, the program that Yoram was operating in 2013 was called the Traditional Volunteers Program. They emphasize, so this involved local Indigenous people as volunteers on an paying sort of honorarium. They emphasize using their local languages with people. They emphasize talking to people about HIV and raising awareness about testing and other health issues in everyday settings, in the context of their everyday relationships. They were able to do this kind of independently without trying to follow a particular script or set of boxes they needed to check, and often quietly. So if we remember that HIV stigma is a massive problem, it can be really useful if healthcare workers understand those dynamics and then are able to help people access care in ways that do not expose their HIV status to everyone in the community. So to keep things private in that sense. This cultural approach that they took was really important because Papua, of course, is a context where culture has typically been stigmatized. It is typically been seen as a barrier. People have been constantly accused of being backward. So the fact that the NGOs are saying, actually, culture is not a barrier. Culture can actually assist us in developing appropriate responses to all of our health problems. I think that's a massive step forward and one that should be continued and sustained. That includes things like they had a practice of temani, right, where the local volunteers would just simply accompany people needing healthcare to the healthcare centers. This was something simple, but it was very useful, and it was not something that an external kind of agency needed to advise people to do. So I guess I'm trying to say here that the social contexts of health, of access to health, are so important. Health is not just the lack of disease. It's not just a healthcare problem. and medicine and the technical capabilities that are increasing is not enough. So no matter how good the hospitals become or how good how many specialists there are in Papua, there are these longer standing issues to overcome to do with the fact that Papuan cultures have been stigmatized, the fact that racism has entered into the healthcare encounters, the fact there's a history of lack of trust of the government, partly because of the violence that continues. So these are just to say that this approach that I've seen in Papua can help us think more about how to ask questions about health, education, and other aspects of development, to think about the ways that people there are already doing things that are moving the situation forward, but also the challenges that continue to arise. So I just have 1 or 2 more minutes left. So that's my HIV works, sort of in a nutshell. I also have done some work related to antenatal care and people's experience giving birth in hospitals, just around the question of the maternal mortality rate. This also is an area where the increasing surgical and technical abilities to monitor pregnant women's health or to provide them with C-sections is useful in some circumstances, but is not enough to actually ensure that Papuans feel that maternity care is safely provided to them and is taking account of cultural experiences and values. There's a lot of pressure in Papua at the moment for women to have babies in hospitals. Many people that I spoke with and my colleagues spoke with in urban areas are not opposed to antenatal care, and they're not opposed to hospital births. In fact, many people, of course, want healthy babies, they want healthy families. So they want to do everything they can to make sure that happens. However, the pressure for hospital births is often translating into situations where people feel they're getting too many unwanted interventions from doctors, that they're not being able to be heard, that doctors are not necessarily listening to their priorities and experiences. And some women are feeling forced to have unnecessary cesarean sections, which only feeds into people's potential concerns about healthcare, and can lead to further avoidance of it. So I guess in thinking back to Pat Richard's questions, I mean, there's many questions I'm sure we will pick up on there, but in terms of education and health and the politics of that, I think that this work shows that it's those social and cultural aspects that we continue to need to consider, the kind of lived experiences, not just the statistics, but the why things are not working and how things actually are through field research in these places to understand what decentralization even looks like on the ground in people's everyday lives. Okay, I'll end my talk there, and just happy for you to ask questions when we get to that. And also I'll put my email in the chat if there's anything you want to ask me about or follow up to get that publication that I was mentioning. Thank you. Kembalikan waktunya to
Professor Jenny. Thank you very much again, Professor Jenny, for having shared her experience in dealing with, especially HIV issues in Papua, which currently sometimes is or very, very frequently linked to the potential of Papuans extinction, a term that I have heard for many times. But what is so important from Professor Jenny's point is the importance of putting problem like HIV not only in the health context or medical context, but also in a more cultural or anthropological context. The importance of listening to the patient, their personal experience before being treated, and this is very important for the health workers and also for the government. Just to give you some idea, Professor Jenny, you already have one question you have to think about that, and this question comes from the government officers asking how then we as the government do if we have to follow the a more anthropological or cultural approach in dealing with HIV or other health issues. And also, before I move to Pak Freddy, Pak Richard, you also have many questions. How to deal with the issue of the pemekaran, so that then pemekaran can really function for the welfare of the people. And also a question on the issue of security. I can see here. Let me check very quickly. How important is the issue of security? Has something to do with the welfare of the Papuans currently, and that is, again, the question for Pak Richard. Now let me jump to Pak Freddy. Again, given his extensive experience serving in so many government posts, and also at the same time, Pak Freddy is also a true Papuans, a native Papuans. So Pak Freddy will be sharing with us Papua development, specifically, or Papuan in the international perspective. So Pak Freddy, the time is yours, around 25 minutes. Silakan, Pak.
Saya share ya. Freddy bisa lihat ya? Sudah?
Yes, sudah bisa. Pak Freddy bisa unmute dulu?
Halo, bisa kedengaran nggak?
Yes, ya, bisa, Pak.
Oke.
Terima kasih,
Okay.
Pak.
Honorable speakers and honorable participants in this webinar, Dr. Richard Chaufel and Dr. Yanu Munro from the University of Queensland and Dr. Gelfrey, and especially the host of this channel, Mrs. Effie Etiarbaya.
Yes, Pak.
I would like to thank Mr. Effie especially for inviting me to this. Let me explain to you about the current development status in Papua. Because in my experience, most of the people see the experience from the past. Actually, it's now changing. How about the strategy and policy and the development approach, especially based on culture and natural resources? Yeah. If you see the cultural actually in Papua, there are 7 areas of cultural with 257 ethnic groups or tribal groups, and the natural resources is now changing in a frame of it must be eco-friendly and sustainable. That is the policy of President Jokowi nowadays. In the past, I don't talk, and I have already experienced starting from President Soeharto until the last President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. The approach is totally different under the leadership of Jokowi. Ibu Jenny, Ibu Eti, kembali yang kedua dong.
Oh.
Ini yang ketiga. Yeah. Nowadays, President Jokowi made the approach to Papua, especially in terms of development, must be based on, it must be thematic, spatial, in means of the infrastructure, this space area which is available to the development itself, and it must be integrated in such a way that to avoiding mis procedure from the past, and it must be holistic in terms, and all that must be in terms of sustainable in the long term, and it has also relation to the uh, Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. I think what President Jokowi is caring about now, Indonesia now, is how did the development in Indonesia, in terms, especially in Papua or other provinces, must achieve the development goals, the sustainable development goals. If the approach is still like the old times, it will make many chaos in the long run. So the President decree number 59 in 2007 about the implementation of the achievement of sustainable development goals must be integrated into the development programs. And if you see, there are 17 targets and 169 achievement that to achieve in the longer run. And then how you talk about Papua itself. What is the Papua condition right now? Let me start with that. Nomor 3. The central government, a regional government, and the Papuans itself, and the private and business sectors have to put special attention on the health, education, and what Jenny has mentioned before about HIV. So health must be a first priority. If not, the issues of genocide Papuan people are always there, especially the Papuans. So health must be first priority. And HIV must put also in the terms of in a high priority to resolve it. If not, there are also always about genocide Papuans. And the second, education itself. If you want to talk about digital infrastructure and everything, it is bullshit when you don't educate the people. The human resources in Papua itself must be increased in terms of education, and that's we can embark then for the long run. And the third is the local food security. Everybody is thinking about now. The question is, how about 2030? How about 2050? Can the Papuan people survive? If you give only rice, it will make them miserable. The sago plantation must be grown. The local food must be increased so they can survive in the long term. And that is now come to concern of the President Jokowi. That's why Bapenas, they are changing the policy. They to put it like that. And the local economic development, basic infrastructure, participation of Papuans in all of it. In the past, there is no participation. That's why everybody's refused the Otsus. They say, we don't like Otsus anymore. So, participation and overcome the poverty with the sociology, anthropology approach, with local character and the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. If you think about 2030, it's a time of next year is 2030 already. It's not a long way to go. It's very short. So I will take a sample of the highland of Papua. I will come to Mepago area. This Mepago area cultural area consists of 9 regencies. Puncak Jaya, Nabire, Panyai, Dogiai, Puncak, and Puncak Regency Puncak itself, Mamberamo Tengah, Middle Mamberamo, Deyai, Intan Jaya, Mimika. And the Lapago cultural area consists of 7 regencies, Pegunungan Bintan, Jawijaya, and so on. Lani Jaya, Tolikara, Yalimu, and so on. How do we do the development in those areas? how you do the approach, because this central island is always shouting about independence, shouting about separation. So what is the approach actually to them so they can become welfare? That's why we have to put the approach must be thematics, holistic, integrative, and spatial sustainable. If you want to achieve, you cannot put all the way in Java, all in Sulawesi, all in Kalimantan, the way of development to put it in Papua. It's very different. The cultural based approach, anthropological based approach is very important to achieve a better life for the Papuans. The last, my last explanation about, in the context of international, national, and local context from 1998 to 2024. And from now on, international, always the issue of human rights. And the others are business like Freeport in the destruction of environment. The social networks and Papua diaspora with the issue of independent Papua. Diplomacy of Papua issues in the Pacific region. West Papua issue in the Pacific Island Forum leaders communicate. And in 2000 there is a special acknowledgement made down there. And the last is the international attention and policies toward Papua must be constructive. I underline this. The international attention and the policies toward Papua in supporting Indonesia must be constructive rather than inflammatory. That is the way Papuans see it. If you want to support the government, do it like that, from the eyes of international. And the national context, what has to be done related to the President Jokowi policy? Dialogue, which is already exampled by President Habibie, as Professor Dr. Chaufel mentioned. 100 Papuan people under my leadership as a governor, I bring them to meet President Habibie. And the President Habibie issued the law of 45 related to what Dr. Chaufel mentioned about the separation of the provinces and related to that. And the expansion of the other provinces in the long run. And Gus Dur, there is a difference between all the presidents. Under Gus Dur, the use of Bintang Kejora is allowed. It's amazing. It's amazing. The use of president, all this at the long run, it becomes turbulence of Papua itself. And last, President Megawati issued the law of 21 is about OTSUS, concerning Papua special autonomy. All of that, there must be national leadership. Always there is a lack of leadership. The regime under Suharto, under Habibie, and all the as President Susilo, I think that there are lack of leadership in terms of national, but locally. And the national reform agenda. What is the national reform agenda? Must be done by Jokowi. It's already described in terms of development of Bapenas, related to Papua especially. And locally, their demands in various cities in Papua and the issues of injustice in development. What Dr. Chaufel is mentioned is right. We have to go through and establish as the assessment of the right policy on the right issue. Integration history, it's always mentioned about from the Papuans. They say we are not integration by force to Indonesia, and so on and so on. So everybody is lack of the background of history. Indonesian history, actually, not only Indonesian people know the history exactly related to resident at Papua colony at the in the year one 8,000 8,000 something 18,000 something. Yeah. And the Papua draft so special failures of roaming coming ahead after everybody refused waiting right now. So their recommendation actually in the long run engaging with legitimate representative of Papuan security in a wide ranging of dialogue regarding various issues, including trust, justice, and reconciliation, security arrangement, and division of province, as Dr. Jafar mentioned. Spatial autonomy must fully implemented for the provinces in a proper way and accountability. Why the people refused autonomy so far? Dear speakers and honorable guests, there are 80 trillions money of outsource trickle down to Papua, and nothing is achieved. That's why all the Papuans refuse this autonomy. They say this autonomy is bullshit. We don't achieve anything about that. Only the other Papua, not the ordinary people for Papuan are achieving that. So it means there is something missed in the policy. There is something wrong in the policy, and we have to correct it. And that is the time during President Jokowi actually, United Nations, United States especially, and others including European countries, Japan, Australia, and Asian member states, must include in a constructive engagement and support Indonesia actually in conflict resolution efforts through quiet but firm diplomacy. It must be a quiet and firm diplomacy supporting Indonesia. That is the only way to resolve Papuan problems. If not, it became chaos. I think it's enough for me. The condition right now is right, both in Jakarta and Papua, for new efforts to achieve a comprehensive solution to the conflict in Papua. Yeah, international actors should reiterate their support for Indonesia territorial integrity, while underscoring the importance of addressing Papua's legitimate concerns. Quiet pressure should be put on the Indonesian government to fulfill its public commitments to resolve the Papuan conflict. Thank you. I give it back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Freddy, for again sharing some of important thoughts. Especially looking forward to the betterment of Papua, and some of the keywords mentioned by Pa Freddy is the importance of focusing on human resource development, and also in terms of policy, participation a lot is very important. Government is to make any one more logical, especially in the context of with more question later, but one of the question raised one participant to Pa Freddy is
Yeah, I'm listening.
yeah, and then for the better public service and so on. So you may respond to that question.
No, I don't get it. I don't get you.
Okay.
What is the question actually?
So now let me jump to he will be speaking on the development and concept. Hope you have 20 minutes. Time is yours.
You can ask, the signal is not really good, so can you write or something, because we cannot hear because the signal is out of the phone.
Dr. Gabriel, can you write it down for me? Because the signal is not good. I can hear you. I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry for that, Pak Freddy.
Can you write down the question so I can read it? So
I will do, Pak.
the signal is very bad.
Okay,
I cannot hear you.
Okay.
You can do something there.
Hello, Professor Hope.
Yes.
Yes, you may go, Professor. You have 25 minutes.
Thank you. I've put a PowerPoint up. So, Pak Freddy's covering some very cosmic questions, and I'm really just covering a small aspect of Irian's development. And obviously, a theme through the whole symposium has been the balancing of trying to get people well off and reasonable amount of equality versus, in this case, the preservation of some of the things that makes Papua really a unique spot. And my interests in Papua are related to, I'm just a ordinary scientist who's been to Irian many times. One or two times, mirroring Jenny Munro, I've actually been there at the invitation of the provincial authorities over the probably the wishes of the central government that I not be there. But it was often in the past a annoyance to the provincial government that they couldn't organise research permits. So some of the work has been a little informal, but always supported by people I knew in the University of Chenjawassi or the Governor's Office. So I've been working on the ecology and climate histories of the high mountains. So my interests go far back in time, 20 or 30,000 years or more, which is probably not today's topic at all. But I also have interests in just how things have changed recently over the time of occupation. And I've got an interest in climate change effects. And I'm also, just by coincidence, forced to take on the job of assessing peatlands across the island. So the topics I wanted to just briefly mention today, and I won't use up too much of our time, is climate change and what we might expect in Papua as distinct from other places, dilemmas that are probably the most prominent environmental problems for the island at the moment. Some comments on peatlands and wetlands in relation to that, and finally some comments on conservation. Now, unlike our other speakers, I'm not really super up to date in terms of personal experience in Papua, either of the Papuan provinces in the last few years. So I apologise for that. I have been, of course, keeping up to date as far as I can on the web. So take my comments as a bit of old colonial scientist type remarks, and you can make your own interpretations. So climate change, interestingly, Papua has the most clear illustration of climate change and its acceleration in the last 30 years of anywhere really in the Asian region. And that's because, of course, we have a small ice cap over here in the Western Snow Mountains, as I've called them there, or Gunung Maiuki, which have lost ice. This is the glacier as it was in 2010. I've had the pleasure of spending a few nights camped up there some time ago, 1995, I guess, and I sat on this mountain for 3 months back in the 1970s. Obviously, that's Puncak Jaya, the tallest peak over here. We think now it probably is over 5,000 metres. We originally assessed its height in the original expedition I came here for at 4,884 metres, and that's still on the maps, but it's likely there's been some adjustments to the mine survey since then. Well, that glacier is the East Carstens top glacier, and it's pretty much disappeared here. Before it was a great ice stream. Here's how it looked when I was there in 1971, and that glacier we're just looking at from over this side is this one here. And originally, that is to say within the last 100 years or so, it extended right down this valley and this ice mass also. And we can see the change in ice extent, which represents warming. The green line is the area in 1936 when the first Dutch expedition came there. And the red line is where it was in 2000 when I showed you that picture. It's much smaller now. You can look at it on Google Earth, and really just the only 2 patches of ice are left here on the North Wall Fern and the Carstens. So what that represents is a rise of about 1 degree, which accords with long-term temperature measurements in Jakarta. There's probably no great suggestion that the mine, for example, which is very close to this site, is having any effect. But it's just part of the rapid warming of the tropics. And the net effects on, luckily, these glaciers are so tiny, the kinds of effects people worry about in the Himalaya, where a major source of water comes from glaciers. There's no such problem here with the huge rainfall and tiny ice mass. So a direct effect of this is not very great, but the warming has been speculated to cause a rise in crop limits around the place. And I was very surprised walking from the Wamena to Kuiawagi a few years ago to find a whole agricultural effort going on at about 3,000 metres, which is much higher than I've ever seen people trying to grow potatoes or some other crops, moderately frost-free, frost insensitive. But they were giving it a good go at a place called Iniuni at about just on 3,000 metres. So crop limits will rise, that sounds good. On the other hand, say, well, disease limits, and in Papua New Guinea at least, it's been recorded that malaria has risen considerably. The other effect of climate change that we seem to be noticing in Irian is, this is the 1998 fire. Here I'm looking at it in about the year 2001 in the mountains just to the west of Wamena. That's an Othofagus forest that's been cooked up in the, and many of you will remember the incredible smoke plume and the fires that just went on for month after month in the 1998, and there have been repeats of these. In 2015, there were severe fires in the Star Mountains, which has a normal rainfall of about 12,000 millimetres, which I would have bet would never burn. And I had reason to think it didn't burn because I have records going back 12,000 years there with about 2 fires recorded in it. But no, it burnt then. This is a picture of that Star Mountain sites, these very, very wet areas. And here on the right is a picture taken after a small fire has come through and burnt, well, probably quite a large fire. And there must have been quite a change in climate for that. So what this appears at the highlands level, at least, is significant droughts that are probably, and frosts that have not been experienced previously. So planning really has to take account of the increased likelihood of these kinds of events. the rest of the island is really very well buffered compared to other parts even of Indonesia and certainly Australia, in that because of the very high rainfall, we can afford to lose quite a bit of it without it having a dramatic effect. But that's not true for southern southern Papua, where we might expect some very extreme dry phases from time to time. So that's just a comment on climate change and something for us to think that it needs a bit of development. This is the Lake Habima, which I'm sure some of you know well, with the new Sorong to Merauke Road, or a little piece of it, wandering along here. Records from this lake, for example, show that there's been burning going on around this lake over the last 8,000 years. These grassy areas are actually the result of humans interacting with their environment through that time. So fire isn't something that's brand new in the highlands, but it certainly seems to be providing some very dramatic examples at the moment.
Jeff, can I interrupt you, please?
Yeah.
Jeff? I did not see your slide, by the way. Do you want me to share your slide from my side? I
Oh,
did not see your
yes.
slide.
Sorry, I thought everybody was seeing it.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Oh, gosh. Well, that's a shame. You must be wondering what I'm carrying on about. So we'll just pop back to the picture of burnt forest in the 1998 event. And now we'll go on and just talk about forests and oil palm. So the most dramatic event effect you can see in looking at successive satellite pictures of the two provinces is, of course, the massive, very recent expansion of clearance. This is a total forest.
Still, I did not see your slide yet. Do you want me to share your slide?
Yes,
I don't
please.
see your slide yet.
Oh, you can?
Yep.
Well, tell me if it's not working.
Not working yet.
Where are we?
Share screen and your slide. Yep. So I can see now, Jeff. Thank you for that.
Okay, well, I'm very sorry, everybody. I thought we had everybody else was so good at sharing their PowerPoints. I thought mine was going to be a snack. So this is forest clearance through the time from about 2000 till 2018. And of course, as Pak Freddy was just saying, the change in attitude around about 2018 means there is quite a significant drop in forest clearance in the last few years. That the concessions that have been granted, of course, are quite breathtaking. I mean, the clearance you can see on the satellite photos is big enough, particularly obvious in the north of Merauke and Tanah, but also around parts of the West Papua as well. But the concessions that have been granted are just 10 times that kind of area. Now, it's an interesting question, forests and oil palm. There's a strong incentive for the central government to retain at least a substantial forest cover in Papua for political reasons, and that is that the rest of Indonesia has reduced its forest cover considerably, and 37% of Indonesia's forests are now in Papua and West Papua. So if they're going to meet their Paris targets, and the amount of carbon released when you clear the forest and release it to oil palm is a stupendous amount, maintaining forest cover in Papua has got a strong central government motivation. So we're hoping that leads to some kind of maintenance of the policy of not letting all the oil palm concession, or all the areas that have been granted to oil palm concessions turn into oil palm. The question, of course, and I guess the theme of this talk is whether I'm the sort of colonial type who thinks everybody else should stay poor so that the world can all enjoy untouched forests. And so there is, I understand that balance between development and conservation, but there is quite a case for not clearing too much of Papua. This is the kind of scene you can see at Tanamera. And I was interested to read, again, I get a lot of my information from various NGO websites, of course, but one of them said that the largest of the clearances, which I think will be Digul Agri, they're expecting to make $6 billion from the timber removal, not just the growing of the oil palm. And that represents, if it's true, I presume there is some sort of stumpage paid to the state for that. Some of that $6 billion goes to the state and then has to trickle back down to the people who originally occupied the forest. But it does suggest one of the motives for oil palm is actually the money you make from collecting timber originally. Forestry in Papua, as everybody knows, is far less productive, far less economic, let us say, than forestry was originally in Kalimantan and neighbouring Malaysia, because the forests are far more mixed, generally of lower stature, and so the timber resource can't be just harvested and shipped off to Japan as it was from Kalimantan, the Philippines and Malaysia. But nonetheless, of course, if that picture is to be believed, there's a huge amount of timber being removed through the ports there at the moment. So we really need some balance between a massive amount of clearing and the general, I understand West Papua has declared itself a conservation province and is aiming to keep at least 50% of the forest managed sustainably. That can mean various things to various people, I guess. And they also anticipate providing much better land tenure to the local people. If the decline of forest clearance after 2018 can be maintained, then there are still high carbon costs. So this is really the same graph shown. Shown for West Papua, which obviously had a sudden leap up here. This is the case. The little green graph shown in here. Again, I've got this from the previous paper that I give the reference to. Shows that some of the forest clearance is going on peatland, and this is a particularly has been a massive problem in particularly Kalimantan, where a lot of the oil palm has been put out onto peat, and the peat has to be drained to provide a bed for the oil palm, and the oil palm then slowly consumes the peat, if you like to think of it that way, or the peat oxidizes. So the carbon cost is immense for doing this. So although, as I understand it, Papua and West Papua have something like 28% of wetlands across their surface, it would be, we're very anxious that we don't repeat the mistake in Kalimantan and start clearing peatlands for oil palm. As you can see here, it hasn't been very pronounced yet, but we only have to clear a small proportion of the forest on peatland to have a carbon yield that exceeds all the other carbon loss from clearing the forest. So finally, moving on to the topic of peat. West Papua is probably the second most extensive peat provinces in Indonesia, and of course between Sumatra and Kalimantan, a large proportion of the tropical peat of the world is preserved. It's been mapped here by partially remote means, and I suspect a fair bit of guesswork as to the depth of the peat, and it actually ignores a whole area of highland peat that is quite prominent. But it shows you that at the moment the main forestry concessions are in this region here, with some limited along the rivers type peatlands, but so far haven't extended onto this smart area where the problems of oil palm would be much more extensive. The peatlands really may have a potential for earning income just by retaining the carbon store rather than releasing it to the world. And I'm sure the peat preservation part of the Department of Forestry will be urging that process. But considerably more researches need to be done. This is just a little piece of research we've been doing in Papua New Guinea to really map the individual peatlands very carefully. This is just a GIS effort, and in fact we've only had very limited ability to get into these peatlands, but it's at least something to do in the future, is to really work out how much carbon is in these systems. And that kind of work, as far as I'm aware, hasn't really been achieved over most of Papua. In fact, curiously, last night I got an email from a German guy who's working with the Jakarta Peat Group, asking if I had any data from Papua on peat depths. And I can give him plenty of highland information, but nothing much from the bottom. So finally, moving on to another topic, which is roads. I was very interested to, originally I walked up to Lake Habima and did work in that region, and there was, this road didn't exist, and then suddenly in must have been 2001 I walked up and came across this road not too long after it had been put in, and it's now of course this is the source road to the road that now goes south to Naduga, which was referred to earlier. And as I understand from the web, this is called the Sorong Merauke Road. The intention is to have a road going right along the spine of the island with a branch off to Jayapura, I presume, and other roads going all the way down to Merauke. So it's an incredibly ambitious project in the sense that Papua New Guinea has no such plans in train or intentions of trying to do such a thing. And part of their reasoning is that they just would never be able to afford the maintenance of such a road. But there's an amazing can-do attitude right throughout Indonesia, as I've seen in many islands and places where the locals get out there and do it. And it's a love. In the case of local roads, it's an amazing display of self-reliance with some help from the state, like they provide road and barrels of tar and things, and suddenly you've got a fairly bumpy but roads that go everywhere. So I'm full of admiration for that, but I think this road has been rather poorly thought out, and at least from my own knowledge of some of the environments in Papua, clearly it's being imposed without any particularly good idea of what the local environments are and how sensitive they are to various kinds of disturbance. So I'm fully in support of an appeal by Wali, who've questioned the Sorong Merauke Trans-Papua Road, which they tell me has a projected increase of 470 kilometres in the 2002 to 2005 period. The total length of the road will be 3,416 kilometres. And they have actually asked the Department of Planning in Jakarta for details of who's thought up this road, what are the planning documents, how is it being projected. And they announced rather sadly on their website that even though the government department is supposed to respond within 10 days, they haven't had an answer yet. So I'll finish by just saying that maybe, I mean, this is a very quick gallop through some of the environmental concerns, but, and I'm certainly not the person to comment on the balance between development and poverty, but it does seem to me that the outstanding questions are really what can we do in the balance, and the call by Wiley and a number of other NGOs is to improve local land tenure controls. There is such a contrast between Papua New Guinea and its customary ownership of land that is claimed versus the Indonesian state rule of lands that are apparently unoccupied, even if they're utilised by local populations, that some kind of middle ground should be needed. The land tenure system in Papua New Guinea has been strongly criticised by neoconservatives because they say that doesn't allow for capital accumulation and proper planning. And it's true that there are eternal arguments about land use in Papua New Guinea, which it would be lovely to avoid. But my own opinion is that the land tenure rules that apply particularly to Papua have been misused. Second suggestion would be to create much more visibility in planning. I've given you the road example, but I can see that there's a great deal of unhappiness about the oil palm developments in that most people aren't aware of what's happening until after it's happened. One suggestion I notice on one of the websites is that the military not be invited in to provide security for these projects. This would force the owners of the projects to negotiate much more honestly and directly with the local landholders, and maybe it would reduce some of the well-known problems of having military participation in the economic development, which seems to lead to some siphoning off of profits by all accounts. Again, not my area of expertise. This third point I'd like to make is one we could argue about. As I say, I'm in some ways a colonialist in that I come from a Western university and I have had the privilege of learning a lot about the flora and fauna of places. And if you like, I'm a kind of a luxury, which people have argued they can't afford in a poorer country. And it's true that much of the science that has been done in Papua has been done by foreigners, which is a great pity. I think it's improved a lot. And I work well with people from University of Cendrawasih. Although echoing Jenny's comments, I'm sorry to say that virtually the majority of the people I've worked with over the years in Papua have died much younger than I am. So it's one of those very sad facts that you have to pour a lot in. But and I know that LIPI have an office in Wamena now. I've never been there, but presumably there's more effort being done. But a lot of the botanical work, I'm aware, comes from the Bogor on sort of expedition level. I really think Papua, the two provinces, should have their own environmental surveys and setups so that really the understanding of the development is based on much better science than has been possible up till now, which all in turn suggests much less top-down planning, and that's kind of a moral I might have drawn from some of the other talks too, that much more interaction between the people being planned for and the planning. And finally, the knotty question of justice in Papua. People make a lot of rules. We have some excellent reserve system on paper in Papua anyway. I think also in West Papua. Some of those reserves, such as the Lawrence National Park, are just absolute mind-blowing efforts, but the resources put into their management or utilisation is really very sad. The park is the same size as Kakadu National Park in Australia. National Park in Australia has, or had before COVID, visitations in the 300,000 people a year. I imagine the visitation to the Lawrence National Park to be measured in hundreds or thousands, and requires an incredible amount of work to get to it. So there are possibilities there, but if you're going to create national parks or reserve systems or declare conservation forests, then some larger effort has to be put into keeping the rules. But with those depressing notes, I would simply say it's a work in progress, as Pak Freddy said, and I think it's such a fantastic country. Some of you might wonder why Australians would be working in Irian, and of course we've got an advantage in that it's at least partially an Irian and Papua New Guinea and Australia are the one landmass, and hence have a common evolutional history and much of the same flora and fauna. So it's rather more lazy of me to work in Papua than to work in, say, Kalimantan with a totally Asian flora. But I'll just finish with a note that I'm still working on a number of Papuan materials, but I don't suppose I'll be able to go back there again. But there's a huge gap there, really. The science hasn't, well, you know, I've done my little bit, but I haven't really been replaced, and there aren't a lot of people seeming to replace me. But I think that situation will improve. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hope, especially this very last concluding remark. I'm so, stunning with this. I may be on my final approach, but Papua still needs you. Thank you very, very much for that. And well, the idea reminded by Professor Hope is that Papua development is there. And unfortunately, it has costed a lot for our environment in terms of the forest cover loss, especially in the peatland. But thankfully as well, Professor Hope has come with some of the proposal in or by improving the local and tenure as well as the participation to also enforce a more or less top-down planning practices, which is currently very much top-down. Also, more investment in knowledge and how to enforce the rules in a consistent way. So again, thank you very much for having shared your expertise in this area with us. And now, before we turn into question and answer, and we have a lot of questions raised so far in the chat room, I would like to invite Ambassador Imran Kotan, because he's about to leave for some other business. He asked me to have, a commentary, short commentary. So, Ambassador Kotan, the time is yours.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in this very distinguished forum. May I start by offering my sincere thanks to all speakers, Pak Freddy, Pak Richard, Ibu Jenny, as well as Pak Geoffrey, for your insights. I'm very happy that you continue focusing on the Papua's question, in particular, probably generally on Indonesia as well. Just want to underline a couple of points touched upon by all speakers. Number one is I just listened a few weeks ago directly from the horse's mouth that the autonomy fund will be increased in the next fiscal year. Roughly, those two provinces will receive around 15 billion US dollar. I think if, for example, this fund would be directly distributed to the Papuans, I think they would have been the richest man in the world. But anyway, I think there are some regulations or laws governing the usage of this autonomy fund. That is the law number 21 of 2001. And currently, debates are going on whether or not to continue this law. Some rejected, some supported the continuation of this fund to the next fiscal year. But let me also try to highlight some of the points touched upon by this law. Actually, this law regulates four main subjects. Number one is the formation of the ad hoc human rights tribunal. And the second one is the formation of local political parties. And the third one is the formation of what they call as Truth and Reconciliation Committee. We failed on those 3 points, unfortunately. But the current discussion has been focused on the usage of the special fund. Let us remind ourselves that the fund is actually designed to fund 4 strategic sectors. Number one, as Jenny mentioned, is about the health. And second one is about economy, Pak Richard also mentioned. And then also the infrastructure, Pak Freddy also mentioned. And the fourth one is about how to develop the local economy. Those are the 4 strategic sectors that are meant to be developed by the distribution of the special fund. Now, let me briefly brief you about the current situation in Papua. And I say this with some authoritative experience because I have visited Papua on a number of occasions. Have been in contact with some key players in the region. Actually, last week I met with 2 noted religious leaders. They mentioned actually the willingness of the central government to develop Papua is absolutely sincere and genuine. The problem is the local elites use this special fund for their own purposes, self-interest purposes, other than those as stipulated in the law, as I mentioned, to develop those 4 strategic sectors. And those 2 noted religious leaders stated to me loud and clear, Pak Imran, if the central government is firm enough to implement a stringent verification system, they believe that all those issues will disappear. Currently, as we speak, there is no stringent verification system put in place either by the central as well as the local governments. We have to admit that. We have to be sincere to ourselves. So they said, those 2 noted religious leaders said that actually, if the central government is determined enough to put in place a stringent verification system to verify the usage of this special fund, the issue will be easily dealt with in Papua. Currently, I have to admit that the situation in situ in Papua is a bit chaotic. If we say that everything is okay in Papua, basically we are lying. But then again, we need to really try to find the core problem. Why is it so? And according to my finding, as I said, I have visited Papua on a number of occasions. I have interacted with local authorities as well as local wise men, so to speak. they came up with the same idea. Please put in place a stringent verification system, either internally by our government or externally by, say, for example, KPK and the rest. Then we will know who misused the fund and how to deal with them accordingly. I think according to those who I have consulted, each and every single Bupati, as well as Wali Kota, probably governor, should be held accountable for that matter. It's really concerning. That is why I think this webinar is very important to try to draw the attention of the local as well as central government on how important it is to put in place a stringent verification system so there will be no misusage of special fund in the next fiscal year. And of course, the special fund is designed also to develop the education of the Papuans, because one of the issues that we need to focus on is how to develop the human resources of Papua in order to be able to run the regions in a manner that is compatible with transparency as well as accountability applied in the rest of Indonesia. As we speak now, I have sponsored around 30, personally, I have sponsored around 30 Papuan students to study in Jakarta. And that is my small contribution. I always mention, I love Papua because I have been associated with this region back since 2002 when I was Indonesian ambassador to Australia. I was summoned to Parliament. There were only 2 Indonesian ambassadors, brave enough to come and brief the Parliament. One among those is me, and the other one is the late Ambassador Sabam Siagian. And those 2 are all Batanese. So we don't have any handicap to deal with Australians. Sorry, Bu Jenny, Pak Richard, and Pak Geoffrey. Okay, but anyway, education is very key in terms of developing Papua. And I think if we are able enough to really supervise the implementation of this program, the special autonomy program, I think Papua will be as good as other provinces in Indonesia. And that, I think, not only depends on the central government, but as well as on the local government and the local people, the Papuans. So probably I need to stop at this point, but again, thank you very much for organizing this webinar. So we can, I hope that the organizing committee can connect with our embassy, probably in Canberra or in our consulate generals everywhere in Australia, to try to convey the message that we are discussing, just to enrich the discussion on Papua at the national level, as to allow Papua and Papuans to progress, to excel into a much brighter future in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Gaby, still mute, Pak Gaby.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pak Teddy. So thank you very much, Ambassador Kotan, for having shared with us some of the thoughts based on experience. And I remember sharing, one of the difficult time with Mr. Ambassador in Vanuatu when we are speaking about something on Indonesia, and then all of a sudden Indonesian flag was put down by some Vanuatuans. So. Good luck, Pa. And if you have to leave us, then again, thank you very much. You have a good day.
Thank
Now,
you.
Now, let me ask Bu Evi
Yes.
to distribute the question or comments shared by participants in the chat room. Bu Evi, the time is yours.
Yes, this is for Pak Freddy. You can hear me, Pak? Hello. Okay, maybe for another questions for panelists is from Mayra Enda. I'm going to raise the followings in the what kind of military approach in the future for better Papua? And then the questions only for Freddy. What kind of requirements strategy to monitor for the implementations of OTSUS in each regency and the district? And from Jacob for speaker, given the complexity of the problem in the socio-political, health and environmental, economic, education, cultural aspect Papuan and are facing, is there any concrete actionable step taken by the concerned international community to assist Papuan or simply leaving this problem to the Indonesian government to do whatever it wants? That's the question from Jacob. Is that you can clear my?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then only for Freddy is about that. Is that the late President Gus Dur? What do you think about the President Gus Dur about the use of the Bintang Kejora flag? Is that still relevant or still sensitive nowadays? Or Bintang Kejora flag is only the symbol of culture? So, Pak Freddy, you can hear me clearly? Maybe Yahya?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. All right, yeah, thank you
So
very
I can
much.
explain about that.
Yes, sir, please, sir.
Are there all the
Okay, thank you for the time given.
Okay, please go ahead, Pak Freddy. Yeah. Yes, Pak Freddy, you may go ahead.
Okay. I will back to the. I can hear you. I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, Pak Freddy.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, then I will explain. I'll be back to 20 September 1960. 20 September 1960. There is a speech of Queen Juliana. At the time, the province was called Netherlands Nieuw-Guinea. After the meeting in The Hague, December 1949, and then then the dispute running on about this colony, which belongs to the Netherlands Indians at the time. And then in 20 September 1960, Queen Juliana made her in her speech as follows: In the coming year, Netherlands Nieuw-Guinea will enter an important new phase in its development towards self-determination. For as soon as the Nieuw-Guinea Council, which will consist in the main of representative of the native population, has been set up, administration legislation will be possible only with the cooperation with the Dutch. based on this speech, the governor at the time is the governor Platil issue local province decree, governor decree about the cultural flag and the Volkslied or the cultural song. Cultural flag is Bintang Kejora and the cultural song is Hai Tanahku Papua. At that time, everybody is thinking that, oh, it's a national anthem. Oh, it's a national, how do you call it? National flag. No. When it's national anthem or national flag, it must be issued by the Queen, not the governor. That is only clear. Who knows, understand the government procedure. It's clear like that. It's not issued by the Queen, but it issued by the governor because it has relation with the cultural, the flag, cultural flag who shows, and the cultural song, Hai Tanahku Papua. But everybody in Papua until now, they understand it as a, oh, this is a national flag and this is a national anthem. No, it's wrong. Why it is like that? Because the Dutch policy is like at the time, they make all the provinces abroad. They call it like Suriname, Curaçao, Aruba, Saint Martin. All these provinces are under Netherlands government as their provinces abroad. They have an own minister concerning these provinces abroad, outside of the Dutch, outside of the Netherlands. That is the policy. They want not to live foothold in Pacific area. They want to not to live that because Indonesia is already independent. That's why they keep Papua as their province in the long run to put all their interest inside Papua. And this is the mistake. And that mistake become miserable to all Papuans until now. Everybody think that 1 December at that time, because they issue also the recommendation that 1 December 1960, everybody can hoist that flag. When Gus Dur asked me about this, I explained President Gus Dur about this. It's not a national flag. It's a cultural flag. It's a cultural song about how gracious God bless the province with abundance of resources. And everybody in Papua until now, the next generation come, everybody saying, oh, it is the Independence Day of Papua. And this is the mistake that we make. Because everybody doesn't know the exactly history about this matter. That's why I mention it. Indonesian people in all, especially the Papuans, must know exactly the nature, the anatomy of the historical background starting in 1828 about this colony. In 1848-45, they separated between Papua New Guinea and the Dutch New Guinea. They separated. Papua New Guinea at that time belongs to Australia and Germany. Germany got in the north, and in the southern part, Australia got it. And in this case, Britain. So if you go back, flashback to this history, when everybody doesn't know exactly about this history itself, they make always issues about independence and so on. It's very sorry about that everybody doesn't know about exactly. The political issue at the time from the Dutch is to have a foothold in the Pacific area. And that is the only chance to keep Papua for their own business. And that's why Sukarno became Trikora and so on. So I think that is clear for the history. That's why President Gus Dur want to announce the name of Papua again for the province based on the cultural, not based on the politics. And the other side, there is another question about what is in the wrong. There must be a reform done by this government about the military process and the security process and so on and so on. There must be a reform. If not, we will always face the how do you call it, international always issue about the human violation in Papua. Thank you. That's all. Effie, I give it back to the moderator.
Okay, thank you, Pak Freddy. Yes, maybe other speakers will reply for the questions from Myra and Jacob.
Ibu Evi, pertanyaan saya ke Pak Numberi belum dibahas, coba.
Oh, oke, sebentar ya Pak ya. For all the speaker, what kind of military approach in the future for better Papua?
Okay, I will answer it.
Okay, Pak. Please.
Indonesian government already follow the international law about human rights and so on. We already issued the Indonesian law about that. But so far, there is always not following that. In peacetime, actually, it must be not a military operation, but it's a police operation related to establish the established of how do you call it, for the people, not the military operation. And that is clear in all that decree and all that law that we undersigned internationally, and also we issued in locally in terms of Indonesian law. So I think we have to follow that. If we follow that clearly, then we can't make mistakes in the future. Thank you.
Okay.
This operation in peacetime must be done by police, not by the military. It's clear like that. Okay.
Any other
I give it back
counters
to the moderator.
From Mr. Richard or Jenny?
Perhaps I could comment on the issue of the appropriate military response.
Yeah.
I very much agree with Pat Freddy that it is a case where reform is needed. And if I look at the comments from responsible ministers at the time of the widespread demonstrations in August of September of last year and subsequently, I think that there's if I detect correctly, an ambivalence and ambiguity. Many ministers, and I'm thinking of the current Menko Polkam, Pak Mahfud MD, the Indonesian government is not pursuing a security approach, pendekatan keamanan. And it's a kebudayaan or sectoral. There's lots of, you get the sense that it's looking for euphemisms. Essentially, when both Pak Mahfud and prior to him, the former defense minister, former General Ramisad, have responded to the appeals, requests from various politicians and government leaders in Papua that Indonesian security forces should be withdrawn from Papua or parts of Papua, the response is to say that this is not possible. That there, General Ramisad went to the extent that in perhaps an unintended side comment that of course we couldn't. Of course, Indonesia couldn't withdraw its military forces. Papua would become independent. So it was in a sense an unintended recognition of the importance of the security forces in the eyes of those responsible ministers in Jakarta for maintaining Indonesian authority in Papua. And I think in this light, I think that this gets to the, in a sense, one of the core issues. How does the national government govern a region like Papua, where there is an element of the population, a section of the population, who is opposed to Indonesian rule, and that what in developing the governance mechanisms, what is the role of the security forces in those circumstances? And if we look back all the way to 1963, at no point in time has either the armed or peaceful resistance by Papuans ever threatened Indonesian control from 1953 to today. But in the dilemma faced by the national government is that one of the key strategies used to maintain authority has been the deployment of security forces. And if we look at the central government's response to the killings in Nduga, the demonstrations in August or September last year, more troops were sent. If we look at the analysis that LIPI has done, in a sense, the use of the security forces to maintain authority is also one of the factors that fuels Papuan national identity and the desire of many Papuans to leave Indonesia. So it's in a sense a dilemma that the national government is confronted with, and it is that sense of, I suppose, self-doubt that without a significant deployment of security forces, that the national government is no longer able to control Papua. And I think that's the dilemma that I think national governments have been struggling with, certainly since the fall of Suharto and in some senses before then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. Maybe Dr. Hope and Jenny, if you want to add.
Let me underline some. Yes, I want to add what Dr. Richard mentioned. So maybe I think that my explanation not enough. I want to tell everybody also the how do you call it, the guests and so on.
Yes.
The participants. There are three requirements according to international law, and we are already stipulated by Indonesian law, of military operations. Military operation is necessary when the enemy is structured in a way like professional military organization. I mention once again, the military operation must be involved in terms of if the enemy is structured like professional military organization. The question is, these OPM and so on, are they like that, structure like that? I think not. The second, are they occupying a certain area in Papua for years? That is the second condition for military operation. If not, then forget this military operation. The third, the attack must be fully and intensive, not sporadical. Sporadical, it means bandit. Bandit, you cannot classify them as national enemies. They are bandits. So it's clear like that. We are already stipulated in Indonesian law about the international standard for military operation in peacetime. Thank you. I give it back to the moderator. Thank you, Effie.
Thank you,
It's clear
Freddy.
like that, my explanation?
Yes.
Very
My
clear,
explanation
sir.
is clear? Very
Yes.
clear, okay.
Yes, maybe
Effie,
another.
you may also give some time to Bu Jenny because there are few
Yes.
questions to Bu Jenny.
Yeah,
And
yes, sir.
I can see that Bu Jenny has also responded to the chat room. But well, I'm still thinking that Bu Jenny needs to say a few words on those comments. So please, Bu Jenny.
All right, thank you. Yeah, there's a few comments I replied to in the chat because I wasn't sure if we would have time to talk about them, and I just wanted to thank the people for asking such interesting questions. I think just to the question about the military, I guess, was directed to all of us, and the only thing I could add there really is just to, I guess, reiterate the health effects of militarization and violence and displacement. Effects on civilians, and also this kind of loss of faith in the government, the state, as going to protect Papuan lives that comes about as a result of, even if they are supposedly kind of random, so-called clashes, or if there are, sometimes we hear that soldiers go, do something outside of what they've been told to do. Even if that is some of what happens, I think the loss of faith that people experience because of those, insecure surroundings contributes to not just physical health problems, but mental health problems as well. I'm just looking at which question do you want me to take up from the chat? There's
especially the culture-based approach to deal with the issue of health.
Yes.
Okay, culture-based approach.
Yes.
I'm not sure. I think I've lost track of where it is in the chat, but that's okay. So I guess my thoughts on culture and health is, and especially, of course, Papua is very culturally diverse. So I'm not thinking about we need to develop like a checklist of cultural attributes and then try to, develop a different policy or a different program for every aspect of cultural diversity that exists. I'm not thinking about the cultural context in that way exactly. I'm thinking more about how, since culture is dynamic and it's always changing, and it is always contested, and it takes people kind of participate in it. They shape it as well as it shapes us. So the cultural context I'm thinking about in terms of policy are probably more about bringing in and allowing space for local experiences, for local lived everyday lives, I suppose, for local people to have a strong role in those policy discussions and leading those policy discussions. Those kinds of things, I guess, the localization of the policy, that could extend to the evidence base that we need to build culturally aware and effective policies that would include not just maybe statistics or surveys, but also this kind of qualitative approach I was mentioning in terms of asking, interviews or spending time with people to try to understand how these services, for example, are not meeting their needs. So what are the issues? As Septa mentioned in the chat, in terms of HIV, we can see that even if Papua tests a large number of people, so there's some socialization and awareness is raised, a large number of people might undergo an HIV test, an even smaller number of people actually go for treatment, an even smaller number of people stay on the treatment and continue with the viral load counts, and then even a smaller number of people stay on the treatment long enough to have the virus suppressed. So there's sociocultural and local everyday life. This includes livelihoods, economy, and other things that affect every step of that kind of chain. So those are the kinds of things we need to understand those and take those into account when we are considering how to improve health and education policies. I wrap up, but one of the things I found talking to young people about their experiences going to school in Wamena is actually that it's not unfrequent that there's insecurity around the city and in the outskirts that actually kind of hampers young people from going to school. So it's not just, yes, sometimes the teachers are not there. Yes, sometimes the facilities are also of poor quality, but the broader environment, is there any food to eat in that house? What is the overall atmosphere in the household? And also, what is the security atmosphere around? If there's soldiers patrolling, or if something has happened and there's been some conflict, the night before, then you don't see 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds going out to walk to school, and some of them are going some distance to school, right? The overall security environment actually also has an impact on the health and education that people can participate in and access. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe Professor Hope, you want to add something to respond for the questions?
Professor
No.
has actually left us.
Let me add something. Let me add something, please.
Okay, already.
There is a question also about in the long run. How about in the long run?
Yeah.
Let me reiterate what I said related to this security arrangement. It must be clear that the police must be stabilized, safety, security, and order in the region in peacetime. So it's clear like that because we already stipulated in the Indonesian law like that. So we cannot force to put military operation in peacetime. That's why I told you already, it must be the security arrangement must be rearranged and put the police forward to stabilize the safety and security and order in peacetime. Thank you.
Thank you,
I give it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Pak.
Thank you. I give it back to the moderator.
Yes. Yeah,
If
Mr. Richard.
Yep. Could I make a very, very brief comment? One is a sort of historical footnote on Freddie's very, very accurate and useful analysis of dating from Queen Juliana's speech about Papua through to the governor's decisions about at the end of 1961, and clearly the Dutch authorities didn't think about Bintang Kejora being a national flag of a new nation state. But I think even from that time, and if we look at the Manifesto Politique issued in October 1961, and the committee that put that manifesto together included many, or I think all of them were members of the elected New Guinea Raad, the New Guinea Council, that in fact was created on the initiative of Queen Juliana's policies. Clearly, that group of people, who were broadly representative of the Papuan political elite of the time, included people like Nicholas Yao and others. that in their view, they thought about it as the Bintang Kejora as a national flag rather than the cultural representative. So I think that what Vedi argued was a misunderstanding by Papuans about what the flag meant, I think has its origins at the time that it was created. And that I think that the difference, and we can understand the Dutch authorities at the time not wanting to present either the Nuclear Raad or the flag and the flag raising as in any attempt to declare a nation state in Papua, and they were particularly cautious of that at the time when Joseph Luntz, the Netherlands foreign minister of the time, tried to persuade the United Nations to take over the administration and decolonization of Papua. That they certainly didn't. The Dutch authorities, the governor in Papua and Netherlands, New Guinea itself, certainly didn't want to undermine the diplomatic strategies that the Netherlands was pursuing at the UN, and they certainly didn't want to provoke President Sukarno, which they ended up by doing anyway. But I think that those two different interpretations about what the flag represented, was it a national flag, was it a cultural symbol, I think go back to its very origins. And if I could briefly comment on Pa Imran's, Ambassador Imran Kotan's comments about the local elite in Papua, the elected politicians and senior officials, and his argument was that they need their use of the generous budget allocation under the Special Autonomy Fund need to be, they need to be held accountable and so on. I think that raises a very important question about the relationship between that government, what might be described as the cooperating elite. So by cooperating elite, I'm meaning the Papuan elected officials, both at provincial and Kabupaten Kota level, as well as the senior officials. In some ways, that they are looking at it from, I would imagine, the interests of the national government. They are an enormous asset. They are a group of the Papuan elite who have agreed to cooperate and be part of the Indonesian government system in Papua. That group of people has, in terms of numbers, expanded enormously and become much more regionally, culturally diverse over the last 20 years, significantly as part of that pemekaran process, the creation of 4 times as many district governments, so that they're local elites. I think it becomes by Imran's comment about these people being difficult to being held accountable for the way they use the special autonomy funds, in a sense, tells us something about the power relationship between those local elites and the national government in Jakarta. And quite a number of documents have become public, which suggests that some people within the governing elites in Jakarta over a number of different administrations from Gusdur through Megawati onwards are not entirely trusting of the political loyalties of some members of that of that elite. And I think that in turn is related to the question that I raised earlier about the changes in the administrative structure, the process of pemekaran, on what I think there've been a number of questions about what can be done about it? Should more provinces be created? I think that issue of the administrative structures, both at provincial and Kabupaten Kota level, need to be thought about and analysed in the context of the power relationship between the local cooperating elites in Papua and the national government. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Richard. There's another question from YouTube channels. This is from Satrio Darmanto. For Dr. Richard and Dr. Jenny, is there an increase in welfare and changes in the standard of living felt by the Papuan after the development of digital infrastructure by Bhakti, who drive with the under Ministry of Information Indonesia, the Kominfo? Will answer, Dr. Richard? Is that clear?
Look, I'm not familiar with any research which is specifically related to those two factors.
Yeah.
Of increased, improved communications, the improvement of digital infrastructure and so on, and what is the impact of those improvements in communication, better access to internet, etc., and standards of living. I've never seen any data that can. I'm not saying it's unimportant. It clearly is important, but I'm not familiar with any
it's okay.
with any research on that. I think what we do know that the provision of much better digital communications with Papua have certainly changed the flow of information from about what's going on in Papua to the rest of Indonesia, and of course the internet, the international world. And I think that just reflecting on the tens of webinars that have been taking place in the context of the pandemic, that there are many more Papuan voices participating in those discussions, which through their digital nature are not only national, they're international.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the political consequences and the impact on government decision making is from the improvement of that digital communication and how that impacts on the government's decision making process, I think is something that we do need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Pak Freddy want to add?
Yeah. I want to underline what Dr. Richard mentioned, and also Ambassador Imran mentioned about spatial autonomy. The lack so far until now, why the people refused autonomy, spatial autonomy, because there is no supervision and coaching. Supervision and coaching, there is a lack of supervision and coaching from the central government. They only put down the money and they say, okay, this is your money. Governor, do it what you will, and distribute it to all the agencies. There is no a pattern to confirm how they distribute the money, and there is no supervision and coaching about this. In totally, there is no controlling the flow of spatial autonomy budget. It's a huge of budget, it's a huge of money. It's about 80 trillion. I don't know in dollars about, but 8 trillion rupiahs. which they distribute to the two provinces, starting from 2002 until 2019. Why the people refuse it? Because nothing is achieved. And most of them, they shout it out and they say, oh, it's corrupted by Jakarta or by Papuans itself and so on. So what I see on the ground level, according to my opinion, is there is no supervision and coaching how to distribute the money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Freddy. Maybe I also want to add that Dr. Richard said that about the Papuans using the connectivities for especially in this pandemic era. Yeah, we in here we already have some discussions about the Papua issue, starting from history, culture, and even tourism before, and that's. Also invite the participation from Papua, even from Asmat. Before that regions is very difficult to reach. Yeah, that's a surprise us. Yeah, even there are a big rain in Asmat at the moment. At the time, yeah, when we are discuss about the book about how is the doctor have a running the social aid for the asthma people last month, and they can connect very clearly. Even there's no problem with connectivity, so it's really mean a lot. Yeah, the infrastructure development, especially for the accessible connectivity for the telecommunication, is very crucial, and we see that's really developed in the last 5 years, have a progress, and we can feel that the Papua is now like really close to Jakarta, and we can reach because my background is a tour operator, Mr. Richard. So events my destinations can reach Korowai people. Under Asmat region. Before I used satellite phone, but now we can use mobile phone. That's a simple example. Yeah, that's the connectivity, especially for the facilities of technology, communication technology is already running there, and they can use that with Papua. Okay, another last questions from Denny Raja Guguk. What do you think, Mr. Richard and Pak Freddy? What is the best strategy for Papua branding, countering the negative image at the international level? That's the last questions, yeah, before we close this discussion.
Okay, let me underline this. Failure to take advantage of the current window of opportunity under the leadership of President Jokowi will prolong the suffering of the Papuan people. Once again, I underline it. Failure to take advantage of the current window of opportunity under the leadership of President Jokowi will prolong the suffering of the Papuan people. The next coming 4 years are critical period in which the government and Papuans should embark on both initiatives toward peace before the next 2024 president and legislative election begin looming on the horizon. It means that we have to put all effort together in achieving Papua as a piece of peace. In context of development, it must be peaceful. If there is still GPKs and so on, we cannot achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Freddy. Mr. Richard?
Yeah, thank you. I think it is related to the to the issue of digital communication and the improvements of digital communication. So I think in terms about how the international community thinks about, both governments and civil societies, thinks about what's going on in Papua. Kemenlu, the Indonesian government, Indonesian diplomats, no longer have a monopoly of information, and really haven't had a monopoly of information for quite a long while. But I think with the improvement of access to the internet and so on, in as you were saying, even in places like Asmat, means that presenting for the Indonesian government, Kemenlu presenting the desired image to the international community, that is now a competitive process. That there are other people, both in Papua itself, as well as organizations like the UNWP, Benny Wender and his colleagues, competing with the Indonesian government about how Papua is thought about within the international community. And I'm by no means claiming to be somebody who can develop diplomatic strategies, but what I'm suggesting is that Kemenlu is now confronted with a much more complex communication process.
Yeah.
Given that their interlocutor in forum or at the UN, their sole source of information about what's going on in Papua is no longer controlled by Indonesian diplomats. And I think that requires a slightly different approach, slightly different strategies that have to be devised in the knowledge that the people they're talking to have a much more diverse array of information about developments in Papua. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give it back to Gabriel.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mbak Evi, for having organized this.
Hello, Evi.
Yes, sir, Pak.
No. Evi, please, Evi.
Ya.
Please, Evi.
Silakan Pak Freddy.
Please, Evi.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to underline what Dr. Richard mentioned. Please give me time. Only 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. Please.
Okay. I think what Dr. Richard mentioned. I think what Dr. Richard mentioned about the international community is right. The international community must continue to support the Papuan peace process. International community must continue to support the Papuan peace process. And they must also engage constructively with the Indonesian government. On the other side, they have to support the governance reforms in Papua. And the last is support accountability and sustainability management of Papua resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Freddy.
Well, thank you very much, Pak Freddy. I was about to ask you to give some closing statement, but I guess the 3 points are already your closing statement.
My closing statement. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very concise. Maybe, maybe a couple of seconds for Pak Richard for closing statement.
I think I probably had quite a number of closing statements, but I think I'm in strong agreement. Much of what Pak Freddy has been arguing about the importance of dialogue with various sections of the Papuan community and also the non-Papuan community in Papua, with not only with their own governments, but with the national government in Jakarta as well. That I think it is only through that process of whether it is constructive discussion. I think it was one of President Yudhoyono's term, or pattern approach of the LEPI dialogue approach as previously developed. There are a number of options, but I think that I think simultaneously with greater communication with the international community, I think that there has to be greater engagement between the national government authorities in Jakarta and various sections of society in Papua. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Richard. And that would be the last, the final closing statement from all the speakers. Professor Jenny and also Professor Hope have left us for another meeting. But as the moderator of this discussion, I would like to raise 4 points only out of this discussion. The first one is again to echo what Richard has just mentioned, the importance of dialogue. The other one is, we need a better understanding of the history of Papua as part of, understanding the history of Indonesia. The other one is the importance of putting everything, including development, in the context of culture, because Papua has a very specific culture. And then last but not least is the importance of participation in undertaking all development initiatives, including the one currently organized under the Otonomi Khusus policy. And by that, I would like to end this discussion. As the moderator, I would like to apologize if there is anything that we cannot really perform as expected, including the technical problems that we
Yes.
beginning of this session. And again, thank you very much for all the speakers, especially Pak Richard and Pak Freddy for still being with us up to this hour. And also for all the participants for many comments, questions, and as well as sharing through the chat room. So thank you very much again. And then to close this discussion, I would like to ask Pak Teddy, Professor Teddy Mantoro, as the organizer of this discussion, to give a few words and then as well close the discussion. So Pak Teddy, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Pak Gebi. Did you clearly hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thanks to everyone who participated to this conference, this webinar until in the end of this time, until 12:43 at the moment. So let me give you some little bit background about this. Okay. So previously we're running also similar webinar that also about the current development status of Papua. Previously we concentrate to the people, development of the people, and then the economic, and then the infrastructure. All right. And at that time we invite like couple very what do you call the very impressive speaker at the time, like Sidney Jones at the time, Owen Podger, Billy Membraska, the staff of the president, and also Simon Tabuni from Papua Muda Inspiratif. And then for the topic from today, as we already here together, we try to concentrate actually to digital infrastructure to help and to the natural resources. Really unfortunate for today, the digital infrastructure will not go to the deep. So hopefully in the near future we can again continue to have another webinar in relation to the digital infrastructure. For example, we also interest about the food that already mentioned earlier with Ambassador Freddy before, and also maybe we'll go to more deep in the especially to the road infrastructure, not other infrastructure. All right. So with that, I would like to thanks again to Pak Richard Cowell from University of Sydney, and then to Dr. Jenny Munro, from University of Queensland, Professor Dr. Jeff Hope from Australian National University, and of course to the Ambassador Freddie Numberi. And it's surprising me actually. I saw a couple of us actually graduated from the same university. So Dr. Jenny just mentioned she graduated from ANU back to 2010. Actually, Pak Gaby also graduated from ANU. And me, myself, also spent like 10 years at the ANU. I was the lecturer also over there in computer science area. And then, and there's one more, actually. So Jeff also graduated from ANU, and still one more. Dr. Ariana Utomo. She is also the lecturer and at the University of Melbourne. He come up for a moment, but after some she left, really unfortunate. All right. Oh, some of you asked me what is the Mandalawangi and what is the relation with the Papua issue. So let me sharing a little bit to you about the Yayasan Mandalawangi. So Yayasan Mandalawangi was built back to 23rd of September 2002. We developed this yayasan in Canberra actually. Pak Gaby was there at that time. And every time there is some disaster in Indonesia, we as the Indonesian community at that time willing to help, especially we interest in education basically. So we collect a lot of funding actually from many sources, not from our pocket or our pocket money. So now we have already around 670 people with the scholarship, full scholarship. And from Aceh until Sorong, not big number by the way, but we started since 2002. So and also a couple of people we supported in Sorong, starting from primary high school until master degree level. Now we have like 2 currently working in master degree level for STEM area. All right, and then let me share a little bit with you in relation to Papua, because I still have a feeling that a lot of people looking Papua is like a backward province. For me, it's not like that way. All right. So let me sharing a little bit of my experience before. So back to 1990, I managed to go to the top of the mountain of Gunung Tengah in Papua. I think almost similar experience with Pak Jeff. So in my case, I go to the Wilhelmina Peak in Trikora, and then 1 year after that, I went to Bintuni for helping people to search where one aircraft was fell down at the time, belonged to Marpati. And then from there, then I see some situation around 90s. And about 2 years ago, 19 years after I visited for quite some time at that time, I'm running one international conference. The name is ICIC 2011 in Jayapura. What surprising me at that time was in Jayapura, they have like 54 hotels. And they have also four-star hotel like Aston, Swiss Bell, Fox Hotel, and so on. So our conference at the time, we managed to attract like 312 papers, and then 15 countries was also attend to that conference, which came from like Australia, France, Germany, Greece, India, Indonesia, of course, Japan, Malaysia, Morocco, Oman, Nigeria, Netherlands, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and Sweden. So you can see like Papua is already the open space, open city, especially like Jayapura. So if you have some other conference, I believe you can running it also up there. All right. In relation to the digital infrastructure, in Indonesia, this is not easy stuff. Of course, we have 17,504 islands. According to the government data, as you know, if we talking about the number of the island always changing, depend on the situation in the sea, basically, right? And then what's the problem here? The problem is when we want to transfer data, for example, from one island to the other island, especially when we have the distance more than 180 kilometers, that's really hard. Because if you put like two like a microwave, for example, you know the surface of the sea is not flat, so we cannot just transfer the data just like that. even though actually when we have in Indonesia, we have Palaparings, we have like the east, in the middle, and also in the west part. It's already done, actually 100% done, and already also inaugurated by our president back to, I think on the 15th October 2019, last year. But the problem here is, of course, yeah, in terms of the functionality, we need to increase it, and also the usability of the channel also for the communication. So I think the moderator already give me 1 or 2 minutes. I don't want to more. I think relate also. So okay. So with that, we hope that our webinar today, the collaboration between the ARBay channel and Mandalawangi, can give us more objective perspective, and also to raise the new idea for the future development of Papua. Like Freddy mentioned earlier, we also inviting international community to helping Papua to more advanced. Of course, they have to come to the right channel, the government channel. So again, with that, thank you everyone. Hope you enjoyed the webinar today. Thank you.
Yes.
Back to Mbak Evi atau Pak.
I would like to say sorry first for the little trouble this morning when we are start, but I'm really happy that our discussions today is really very serious topic, even about geopolitics and geostrategies. But we are proved today that Papua is not a problem to talk, but maybe so far the way we talk is a problem for that. So I only want little add, based on my experience for 17 years, go around Papua to drive ecotourism there as a destinations, which I saw that's a very progressive developments, especially for the access who now to reach Papua is more cheaper, and Indonesians now, before 80% is my client is only orang bule, only the foreigners who can reach every corner of Indonesia. But now every Indonesian can reach every corner of their country. And so I really prove that our bahasa Indonesia is really pemersatu, who can, it's very powerful language to united us as a nation. And there are also at the moment now, based on Pak Freddy supervisors, we are trying to developing war tourism destinations in Papua, which I just read. I just launched the book about Biak Islands, which we just know. We learned that the Pacific War, which happened in Biak Island, is very important starting point for the Americans to end World War. Maybe Pak Richard. So maybe after this, maybe I will consultation with you, Pak. Yeah. But anyway, again, thank you very much for these discussions. Well, we will try to talk about more Papua. We believe now, I think everyone agree with me, that ethnographical and anthropological approach is more needed for Papua. And again, Papua is not the problem, but maybe the way is a problem. The way we talk is a problem. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Richard, Pak Richard, and Ambassador Freddy Numberi, and another speakers, and Mandalawangi group, and then our moderator, and everyone. See you again for our next discussions about Papua.